Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Literature Channel. I'm Tim Wilson. This is the third of three lectures on Virginia Woolf's beautiful novel, To the Lighthouse. So, in the first lecture, we talked a little bit about background, context, and some of the key themes. The second lecture, we looked at the first section of the novel called The Window. And in this lecture, we'll look at the last two sections, starting with Time Passes, a shorter section that covers very in quick fashion some of the time passing in between the two substantial sections, the window, section one, and the lighthouse, the third section. So, starting with time passes, we just reminding ourselves here that we got to know these characters in the first section who are staying at this summer home of the Ramsays, and we get to know their characters. And probably the character that stands out the most is Mrs. Ramsay, this remarkable character that Woolf has created. And I think I said in the last lecture, we're all lucky enough, if hopefully we're lucky enough to get to know someone like Mrs. Ramsay, who lights up a room, brings everyone forth in that room, is the glue, the social glue that brings people together and makes magnificent moments of that time together. And we have a lovely scene, one of many that she's in at the end of the first section, with Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay sitting together in unspoken recognition of their mutual love. And all of this, the fact that she's such a character who has such a profound impact on the other characters, this makes the death of Mrs. Ramsay, as a parenthetical aside, I might add, in Time Passes, all the more shocking. So as we read Time Passes, we get the following section in the parenthetical aside, as I mentioned. Mr. Ramsay, stumbling along a passage one dark morning, stretched his arms out, but Mrs. Ramsay having died rather suddenly the night before, his arms, though stretched out, remained empty. So it seems for such a character to die, as an aside, it's not really narrated how this happened or the build up to this, and it seems almost cruel as you read this. We also learn of the deaths of two of the children in similar fashion, Prue and Andrew. So again, quotes from the novel. Prue Ramsay died that summer in some illness connected with childbirth, which was indeed a tragedy, people said. Everything, they said, had promised so well. And similarly, a shell exploded. 20 or 30 young men were blown up in France, among them Andrew Ramsay, whose death mercifully was instantaneous. So Andrew Ramsay dies in World War One, Prue in childbirth. World War One, I'll just note, looms heavily in Virginia Woolf's, especially in her two major novels, Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse. And it looms heavily in terms of the after effects of those who live on. And we see in Mrs. Dalloway, for instance, Septimus Smith, who's a veteran of the war and suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. We would call it, they called it shell shock. And also the memories of relatives who've lost loved ones in the war. Similarly here, the the pain is felt by the relatives of Andrew, just as the relatives have lost Prue, have lost Mrs. Ramsay. I'm going to point out too, in Time Passes, we have this ongoing kind of reflection on finitude, on becoming, on the fact that all things are fleeting in this world, and that, including humans, and that we're mortal. And Virginia Woolf uses, I think, taps into this tradition of ways of thinking about that and ways of representing that in literature. And one of the ways that we see is this metaphor of falling of the falling of dead leaves being used as a metaphor for human mortality throughout the tradition, and Virginia Woolf taps on that as well. So if we look at Homer's Iliad, of course, written around 750 for the Common Era, so 2,700 years ago, we have Glaucus' defiant words to the threatening Diomedes. Generations of men are like the leaves. In winter, winds blow them down to earth. But then, when spring season comes again, the budding wood grows more. And so with men, one generation grows, another dies away. Similarly, in Virgil's Aeneid, Aeneas sees the numberless dead waiting to cross the river Acheron with the boatman Charon, and we have the narrator said, thick as leaves in autumn strow the woods, or fowls, by winter forced, forsake the floods, and wing their hasty flight to happier lands. Such and so thick the shivering army stands, and press for passage with extended hands. Similarly, in Dante's Inferno, he compares the dead souls leaving or falling into the river Acheron to fallen leaves. As in the autumn, leaves detach themselves, first one and then the other, till the bough sees all its fallen garments on the ground. Similarly, the evil seed of Adam descended from the shoreline one by one when signaled as a falcon called will come. That's Canto 3 of Dante's Inferno. And John Milton in his Paradise Lost, of course, picks up that epic tradition. There's reference to the fallen angels who are lying on the burning lake as like fallen leaves. So this is early on in the epic, book one. Satan stood and called his legions, angel forms who lay entranced, thick as autumnal leaves that strow the brooks in Vallombrosa, where the Etrurian shades high overarched embower. And then trying to, let's say, echo that epic tradition, we have T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, and also a reference to the dead as numberless and as leaves. Crowd flowed over London Bridge, so many I had not thought death had undone so many. And later in the work, he says, the river's tent is broken, the last fingers of leaf clutch and sink into the wet bank. So too in To the Lighthouse, we have an indication of the decay and death of all things through the evocation of dead leaves. So this is in that section of Time Passes, page 90 in the Oxford edition. The nights now are full of wind and destruction. The trees plunge and bend and their leaves fly helter-skelter until the lawn is plastered with them and they lie packed in gutters and choke rain pipes and scatter damp paths. So this is another way in which Virginia Woolf is echoing an epic tradition. Remember, I think it was in the first lecture we looked at a passage where, in addition to evoking this free indirect discourse as a way of conveying kind of stream of consciousness, it also included an epic simile. Woolf is really trying to, I think, bring meaning to modern existence, and through the novel, by tapping into the epic tradition and the literary tradition in many of the ways that T.S. Eliot is doing in The Wasteland. So we have descriptions of the house in this section, Time Passes, descriptions of the house decaying over the years as no one is there. And in a way, we have in the section a case in point of Mr. Ramsay's philosophy. We remember that Lily's told to think of a table when no one is there as a way of describing Mr. Ramsay's philosophy of subject and object. So it turns out, we learn in this section that even when no one is there, the things themselves only have meaning in as much as they still bear some human shape. They only have meaning in as much as they relate to human interactions and meanings. So from this section, Woolf writes, What people had shed and left, a pair of shoes, a shooting cap, some faded skirts and coats in wardrobes, these alone kept the human shape, and in the emptiness indicated how once they were filled and animated, how once hands were busy with hooks and buttons, how once the looking glass had held a face, had held a world hollowed out in which a figure turned, a hand flashed, the door opened. In came children rushing and tumbling and went out again. So if you were to observe this house and the yard and what have you, even in this emptiness, what it signals, the meaning it has is of human human presence there, moments there, memories there. Without eyes to see them, so if we think of now turning to the flowers in the yard, flowers are not an example of beauty or of the meaning and coherence in things. Rather, they are an example of chaos and what is terrible. So this is an interesting passage again from that section. In spring, the garden urns casually filled with wind-blown plants were gay as ever. Violets came and daffodils. But the stillness and the brightness of the day were as strange as the chaos and tumult of night, with the trees standing there and the flowers standing there, looking before them, looking up, yet beholding nothing, eyeless and so terrible. So we can imagine these things as having human shape, but again, those memories, that takes a human there to be observing it. If you step back and think of that in the absence of this, we have flowers that bloom, but this blooming no longer signifies beauty, meaningfulness, um, kind of the blossoming of a life that could be metaphorically compared to the blossoming of the young lovers. No, these are just another sign of kind of the chaotic becoming that is nature, and therefore it is nothing, eyeless, and so terrible. So in the final section, the lighthouse, it opens with Lily wondering, what does it mean then? What can it all mean? Lily Briscoe asked herself, wondering whether, since she had been left alone, it behooved her to go to the kitchen to fetch another cup of coffee or wait here. What does it mean? A catchword that was caught up from some book, fitting her thought loosely, for she could not this first morning with the Ramsays contract her feelings, could only make a phrase resound to cover the blankness of her mind until these vapors had shrunk. For really, what did she feel come back after all these years and Mrs. Ramsay dead? Nothing, nothing, nothing that she could express at all. So, in the absence of Mrs. Ramsay, the normal connections between things and people are missing for Lily, and so the experience of coming back to this home 10 years later without Mrs. Ramsay is different, and she kind of sees the kind of the emptiness of this place. The house, the place, the morning all seemed strangers to her. She had no attachment here, she felt, no relations with it. Anything might happen, and whatever did happen, a step outside, a voice calling, "It's not in the cupboard, it's on the landing," someone cried, was a question, as if the link that usually bound things together had been cut. And we get the sense that it was Mrs. Ramsay that held these things together. It's a dynamic human soul that can give that meaning to these things. And they floated up here, down there, off anyhow. How aimless it was, how chaotic, how unreal it was, she thought, looking at her empty coffee cup. Mrs. Ramsay dead, Andrew killed, Prue dead too. So it's 10 years later, they're making the trip to the lighthouse, and Mr. Ramsay needs to convince James and Cam to go. Recall in the window in the opening section, James desperately wants to go. He was around 6 at that time. He's 16 now. And Cam is his older sister's around 17, but they don't want to go anymore. It's different. The time has changed, and Mr. Ramsay needs to convince them. He wants to go, and seemingly it's a tribute to his dead wife. From a section, sorry, an excerpt from this section. Then he said he had a particular reason for wanting to go to the lighthouse. His wife used to send the men things. There was a poor boy with a tuberculosis hip, the lightkeeper's son. Lily reflects on a day from 10 years ago and reflects on the power of Mrs. Ramsay, of the human soul to bring things into the open as meaningful things. So, this is, I think, one of the major takeaways of the novel as a whole is how what it means to be human is kind of the making of meaning and the bringing forth of beings into a meaningful relation, uh, into a meaningful whole. And that can be done, we see, through a number of ways. The philosopher, Mr. Ramsay, tries to do it in his own way. The artist, Lily Briscoe, tries to do it in her own way. And as we see here, in her own way, Mrs. Ramsay, by making these memorable moments that people end up reflecting on for the rest of their lives, has done it in her own way as well. It seemed to depend somehow upon Mrs. Ramsay, sitting under the rock with a pad on her knee, writing letters. She wrote innumerable letters, and sometimes the wind took them, and she and Charles just saved a page from the sea. But what a power was in the human soul. So here, Lily's remembering that day from the first time she was there 10 years earlier, and how Mrs. Ramsay's sitting um, under this rock by the beach, writing letters, and the wind kind of takes it, and her and Charles Tansley had gone to pick up the pages. So she reflects on how Mrs. Ramsay is was kind of the anchor around which, or the point around which things had meaning in that visit, and reflects more broadly how this is the power of the human soul generally. That woman sitting there writing under the rock resolved everything into simplicity, made these angers, irritations fall off like old rags. She brought together this and that, and then this, and so made out of that miserable silliness and spite. She and Charles squabbling, sparring, had been silly and spiteful. Something. So Mrs. Ramsay was able to bring them together and make out of that, kind of these little silly moments, something meaningful. This scene on the beach, for example, this moment of friendship and liking, which survived after all these years complete, so that she dipped into it to refashion her memory of him, and there it stayed in the mind, affecting one almost like a work of art. One thinks of that moment there that Lily's recollecting there as one of those moments of being. So we talked about that in the second lecture. So moments of being that Virginia Woolf in one of her autobiographical essays talks about, and these moments of being where things are brought forth as meaningful, as enduring, the kind of chaos and fleeting nature of becoming. So we see that in her autobiographical essay, but also in her novels, these moments of being. Mrs. Ramsay bringing them together, Mrs. Ramsay saying, "Life, stand still here." Mrs. Ramsay making of the moment something permanent, that this kind of moment of being, as I said. As in another sphere, Lily herself tried to make of the moment something permanent in her artwork. This was the nature of a revelation. In the midst of chaos, there was shape, this eternal passing and flowing. She looked at the clouds going and the leaves shaking and was struck into stability. Life stands still here, Mrs. Ramsay said. Mrs. Ramsay, she repeated. She owed it all to her. So those, just go back to that line with she looked at the clouds going and the leaves shaking. So clouds, since Aristophanes' play called The Clouds, has has had this metaphor of things that are fleeting. And I've already talked about how in the literary tradition, fallen leaves have this metaphor of representing the fleeting nature of our human lives. But Lily's able to look at these things and be struck by the stability that endures them. Why? Because people such as herself and Mrs. Ramsay are able to, through art and through the power of the soul, to make meaning and make meaningful relationships with others, say to life, stand still here, and provide some sort of permanence over time. So the novel ends with Mr. Ramsay, James, and Cam reaching the lighthouse, and Lily finally finishing her painting that she had begun in the first section. As she finishes her painting, Lily imagines a wreath of violets and asphodels. So violets, according to the Dictionary of Phrase and Fable, the color violet indicates love of truth and the truth of love. So I think we should note here philosophy and poetry in marriage here. In the language of flowers, the white violet is emblematic of innocence and the blue violet of faithful love. And asphodels, the plain of Asphodel is the location of the underworld in Homer's Odyssey. And the asphodel, where we get the word daffodil, is a flowering plant in the lily family. So lily, lily Briscoe. So I think we have in kind of in the language of flowers, a significant choice in violets, echoing kind of this love of truth and truth of love, the marriage of philosophy and poetry, as well as asphodels pointing both to the underworld, but also to Lily as someone who, through her art, is going to try to overcome, let us say, mortality by bringing forth something that's permanent. So, to summarize and some takeaways, just first on Mrs. Ramsay, as I've said, our lives are immeasurably improved by the people in it, like Mrs. Ramsay, who care for others, who become the point of moments of a family, of a community. Hopefully, we have these people, but hopefully, we ourselves try to be that for others, to care for others. I think one of the enduring truths of much of the wisdom literature one will read from various traditions, to kind of the key takeaways of the great works of the tradition as a whole would be that we gain meaning in our lives insofar as we try to transcend ourselves, try to transcend our own petty concerns with self-preservation, with getting our own way. So if I think people such as Mrs. Ramsay become anchors of meaning for people's lives because they're able to show an example of selflessness, of caring for others. They create meaningful moments and they reach a certain immortality by wrapping themselves around our hearts. This is a selfless, impersonal immortality, not the immortality one seeks through fame or pride. And while a blessing, one can also imagine that it's difficult to live in the shadow of such an exceptional figure as Virginia Woolf feels that she did with her own mother. And how does one live up to such a figure? I think for Woolf, how one lives up to trying to be such a figure is kind of akin to being Lily Briscoe. So maybe we're not able to, not everyone is able, like Mrs. Ramsay, to be kind of the center of service to others and be able to be so outgoing and giving to others in interpersonal relations, but maybe they try through art to do this through other expressive means. Um, Again, this notion of moments of being that we talked about in the second lecture, but also again in this third, time passes, all is fleeting. The decay of the house, the deaths of family members in the second section of the novel underscore this. What makes us human is our ability to impress a human shape on the chaos and meaninglessness of becoming. And in the novel, there seems to be a number of different ways in which we can carve out meaning and moments of eternity out of this becoming. So we have kind of the belonging together in marriage, in a community, in and we see that in the intimate dinner at the end of the first section. We have the art, uh, for instance, of Lily Briscoe. We have caring for others and the world that Mrs. Ramsay does. So moments of being give the world meaning, beauty, and grace. We have philosophy and poetry and marriage. We've talked about this theme. It's kind of an old quarrel. Plato had said in the Republic, as opposed to this ancient quarrel we see in Woolf, they're belonging together, Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay, in a way representing that. And where there are limits of reason and the logical approach, if pursued exclusively, it has its merits. Mr. Ramsay has merits. I think there's a certain kind of approach to the novel to see that he's just kind of a figure to be ridiculed or scorned because of his limited, let's say, rational perspective. But I think, especially in the third section, we see his devotion to his wife, his devotion to his children. It's in a different way than Mrs. Ramsay, but it's there. And his approach, while there are limits to that, is has it has its merits. Um, and so too, there are limits to the artistic shaping of the world of a Lily Briscoe, but it's a way of creating meaning in the world. So each is seen as a way to carve out moments of eternity in the flux of becoming. And this is, as I said, symbolized by the marriage of Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay, the belonging together of the love of truth, philosophy, and the truth of love. So with that, I'll close, and I hope you enjoyed the lectures on To the Lighthouse, and I hope if you haven't read it, it inspires you to read it and or to read it again with these themes in mind. As I said at the beginning, I think it's maybe the most beautiful novel, most beautiful modern novel, most beautiful modern literary work, and Virginia Woolf, probably the greatest literary author of the 20th century, in my humble opinion. So thank you very much.